Hello friends, welcome to another tutorial of my watercolors. We're going to paint Piazza Santo Spirito in Florence, which is an iconic plaza filled with history, even recent history, and I'm going to talk about it a little bit later. But let's focus on the watercolor today because I want to introduce something today that's called composition, and many of you might have heard about it, but it's very difficult to grasp because a lot of people have different opinion on composition, and for a good reason, because there are famous painters that used a very odd composition and it kind of worked. But then apparently there are some rules in composition which I completely agree with, and you're supposed to follow those rules. However, nothing is written in stone, as always, and I'm layering the first parts of this building, which is the Church of Santo Spirito. It's a very ancient church, and inside there is a crucifix attributed to Michelangelo, and confirmed that it's by Michelangelo. And it's you might have heard about Michelangelo. It's the guy from the Sistine Chapel in Rome. Michelangelo sculpted this crucifix in the year 1492, 1493. We don't know exactly, but it's worth visiting. And as you see here, I'm just applying some common colors for buildings in Florence, which the common color is, of course, ochre. But when ochre is, so the houses are painted with ochre, which is light brown. But when the ochre is hit by direct sun, your eye perceives it as yellow. Remember, when you're painting, you're trying to give your eye some content to munch on. You're not trying to paint. You're not like running to Home Depot and matching the color swatches to see which paint is it. That would be a big mistake because color changes with light. So it doesn't work like we think it does, that color is one color and you're applying that color to everything. In this case, for example, the church and the houses are extremely similar as color, but as you are gonna see at the end of the painting, they're gonna look different. And that's because we are trying to give the impression that these colors are different, while I already applied the same color to the church and to the houses. They're already looking different if you look at it. But the biggest thing here is that the houses have a lot more pigment in it. The yellow is a lot more pigmented. And then we're going to apply another substrate of another color on top of it. And as we discussed already, watercolors are meant to be layered, and therefore they're going to change their values. So let's spend a couple of words on composition here. So when you are in Piazza Santo Spirito, it's a plaza with a lot of little cute cafes and stores, and there's a bunch of restaurants, and you can kind of see them here, but on the right side. But that's actually the street that's next to Piazza Santo Spirito. What you are usually witnessing in Piazza Santo Spirito is a lot of people, and suddenly, so there's a lot of confusion inside the plaza. There's also a market every week. But suddenly you see this giant church and it's completely empty. The facade, it's flat. And there was a project to build a nice facade like the one in the close to the Duomo. That style was in project towards the end of the 1800s, There was actually a project to do that, but they never did. They decided we're going to go with a bare facade, which I think was a great choice. So you're facing this composition conundrum. Like you have a very busy plaza, and then suddenly you have a very empty church facade. So your instinct, this is where I was going with this. So your instinct is to paint this giant empty space. And that would be a mistake because composition-wise, you need a focal point. Otherwise, the space doesn't work. So the little street on the side is actually the focal point where your eye is going to run. After inspecting the church, maybe the doors, you're immediately going to go to that little street and see what's inside the little street. And that's called the focal point. And it's actually there. I might even argue that the perspective is wrong. But like I said, we're trying to please our eyes, not what's actually there. And so I'm not supposed to see those houses on the left side in that focal point. I'm only supposed to see the houses on the right side. Otherwise, the church should have been a little skewed, but it's not, it's flat. So we're standing right in front of the church. But anyways, the point is that I want a little bit of movement with that big facade, which is completely still. So I'm applying some blue here for the doors. We're gonna make them a lot darker, but this is just to layer some colors and to see how they work together with the other colors. And blue is usually, so what is blue? Blue is the complementary color of yellow. So when you're supposed to, this is a kind of a trick and it's kind of a rule in painting. When you are using a predominant color in your watercolor, and then you want to put some shadows in, you are supposed to use the complementary color to the main color that's in there. So if I have a yellow wall, the shadow on the yellow wall will be blue. And there are reasons for this, because complementary colors are the ones that nature gives us to our eye. Our eye is specifically designed to see complementary colors. And you can look this up in some anatomy and physiology book that medical students usually have. And you will see that our eye, our retina, is made by different parts that are, I don't want to be too technical, but basically our eye is supposed to distinguish colors, only 3 colors actually, and the combination, and a lot of it has to do with this, with how our eye works. So I'm applying some shadows here. I'm layering even darker in this building, because this is going to be probably the darkest part of the watercolor, and it's part of the, this is something that I really like to say, because it's part of the composition, is you're standing in front of your subject that you're about to paint, and then you squint your eyes and you determine where is the darkest part and where is the lightest part, and you're supposed to have a big contrast. It's nice for the eye to see that there is a big contrast in between those parts. So I'm just putting some more shadows here, but as you can see, the church is already coming alive, because that blue that I applied on the top to the big circle, it's called a rosone. That is already giving us some clue about the perspective. And I'm applying this really dark color because there is a glass there, and you don't see anything inside, of course, because it's completely dark inside. So I'm applying a really dark color there. And I kind of want this because there is a lot of contrast there, and those are the darkest parts of the painting, which I have seen before doing even the sketch. That's how you start. You start with a sketch, and then you paint over it. I actually do a 3-stage watercolor, which is you start with a sketch, then I do an ink drawing with all the important parts where it's needed, and then I finish it with watercolor. Sometimes I'm very tempted to just do a sketch with the ink, because that's my favorite way to paint. However, there is no color, so it doesn't really work all the time, and it falls a little flat, and not everybody is a fan of black and white. So I'm trying to use colors more often. By the way, if you're still watching and enjoy this tutorial and would like to support the channel, you will find my link to my Etsy shop in the description below. And most of these tutorials are available there for you to order as prints, but I can also paint them as originals. Just send me an email there on Etsy and we'll start talking. And I can also do a custom watercolor for you from any picture, any photo you have, including portraits, pet portraits, anything you like. So I'm just layering everything here, and even old masters, they worked in stages. And some paintings, you know, when Michelangelo was working on the Sistine Chapel, it took several years to complete it, because you have to let your brain process what you have done, and then you keep going. So you work in layers. You do a first layering, see how it works, see how the colors work together, and then you correct it if you can. So gradually you reveal the whole painting. The painting almost never comes out all together. You have to do first layer, but do everything in a first layer. You don't want to do one part on the right, or you don't want to just do the church, or you don't want to just do the houses, because you have to see how the whole thing works together. So that's one of the main reasons why we're trying to apply these layers of watercolors to the entire painting, because you have to see how they interact with each other, and not how they interact technically like the pigments, but how they interact in your eye. Is your eye happy with this? When you're looking at it, does it give you feelings of pleasantness or feelings of there's something wrong? If you feel in your painting that there is something wrong with it, but you don't know what it is, it's probably because you violated some of the rules, which we have talked about. And the painting doesn't work. And that does happen. Even big masters, there are x-rays of famous paintings where big masters have corrected their paintings because they wouldn't work. I don't remember which painting is this, but there's a Virgin Mary sitting on a throne, and she was supposed to have a baby in her arms, but instead the painter decided that the baby wouldn't work, and so he put a bunch of flowers, and she's carrying a bunch of flowers. So you too, don't be afraid to change things around if they don't work. So that's perfectly fine. So I'm applying some darker shades to the steps. There is about like 10-15 steps to go up on the church. And once again, they are completely flat. There's nothing on them. There's no railing. It's just 15 steps. And I'm applying some dark shades here to emphasize the shadows on the bell tower. And I'm using this very thin brush because I want to make sure that it's actually getting all the nice shadows where they're supposed to be. So I don't want to overpower it with shadows, but just almost using it as a pen, which is fabulous. With these darker shadows with the doors, so they look like they are there is an indent in those doors, and they look like they're a little bit set back from the trim. The trim also, the trim is, I think it's travertine in real life. I'm not really sure. And I'm giving some more shadows here because I want this to kind of come out. And I don't want, I want that part, which is the one that calls the eye, to be able to linger on some details, which is wonderful because not always we can see details. And so a lot of times what painters tend to do is they do details in foreground and then they don't do details in the background, but actually our eye is able to perceive details in the background. So I'm a big fan of detailing both the foreground and the background. And I'm adding some details to the rosone, which are shining in the sun, because this scene is in full sun, and so that round circle on the church, that one is built from different layers of I think it's travertine too, and so it will have different shadows on it. I'm adding some more shadows. I'm really having fun with this little brush because it works like it can switch from being a paintbrush to being a pen. I love this. So it's really something, and I can add details. I can make sure that I can use a little bit more of a dry ink. And also another thing I want to say is that the paint I'm using here is not black. It looks black, but it's not. It's actually really, really dark. I think this one is, I forgot the shade of blue, but it's dark blue. And it's not ultramarine, because ultramarine is not super suitable for shadows on buildings. I prefer more of a violet vibe, because ultramarine, you need to have a contrast with the sky, which we're gonna finish. The sky is gonna be ultramarine, and the sky is almost always a shade of ultramarine. It is rare unless there is a sunset or unless there is something going on in the sky. But you know, at noon in Italy in summer, you're gonna get an ultramarine sky, sometimes with a touch of indigo. But to be honest, the sky is almost always indigo. However, if you want to trick your eye and you want to actually make a sky that looks indigo, you're supposed to use ultramarine. Otherwise, it's going to be way too strong, in my opinion, and that doesn't work very well. And I'm using my little brush here to mimic the pavement of Piazza Santo Spirito, which is cobblestones, and I'm creating a little perspective here. So once again, there is going to be a little bit of a perspective, so your eye is going to know where to go. And I'm also mimicking the perspective in the street and adding some more details so that we have something to look at here. The side of the building, I could have made the bell tower a little bit darker because it is actually a completely different kind of material from the church. Actually, I take that back. So the church and the bell tower are made of the same material, but in the late 1800s, when they decided that there's not going to be a facade, they covered the church with what do you call it? Like they covered it with plaster base. Basically, that's a outside plaster, and they decided to make it flat. It also has, I just painted these darker areas on the bottom, and that is, I think it's travertine, and it is supposed to protect the the facade from moisture from the ground, because every single house in Florence has this problem, that if you have anything close to the ground when it rains, of course, there is moisture coming from the ground, and that beautiful plaster that you have there, the beautiful, it's called intonaco, and basically in Italian, and it's the outside, I don't know the technical word in English, but it's the outside of a building that is built with brick and mortar, and then you put this layer of I call it plaster, I don't know how else to call it. And here I applied the ultramarine sky with a little tree in the background. Those trees are really there. There's actually a convent in the back there. I could have gone a little bit darker on the sky, but maybe in the next one. And I'm just trying to paint this tree here. There's a convent there with trees, which is very unusual because it's in the center of the city, and it's there's a little park there, I guess, with trees. So I'm using my little brush again just to like show that there's branches, and it's so tiny. It's really difficult to do a tree here, but I'm gonna try anyways. Yeah, I could have gone a little bit darker on the tree too, but maybe this is enough. Another thing I wanted to point out, that there is no huge shadows except the one cast by the bell tower on the church and the one that's on the street underneath the roof. And this is something very typical of Florence. When you're out and about and you squint your eyes during the day, you're gonna have the bottom where the shops are, that's gonna be very dark because it's the direct shade, it's the shadow that's casted by those awnings. And then you have these the side of the palace, the side of the houses, it's gonna be very bright, and the higher you go, the brighter it is. That's kind of a rule. And then the top of the roof, because it's casting a direct shadow, that's going to be very dark. So it follows this kind of this rule that it goes dark on the bottom, then lighter, even lighter, and colors are super bright on like the second and third floor, and then you get the roof, which casts a shadow, and that's going to be very dark. Well, this is the painting. I'm just adding some shadows here. I hope you had fun watching this. I just don't want to finish it because it's so beautiful. And remember, there is the Etsy store down below in the link, and check it out. Thank you so much for watching, everybody, and I'll see you in the next one.